Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to hand it to John Barclay.
I'm going to try without the microphone because it'll be easier to chat. I hope that's all right for you all. But shout at us if you can't hear. But Roger has just said to me that he's never ever had a problem with being heard before. So that's very good news. So Nick, thank you so much for the welcome. Jeff, thank you too. It's a joy to have an afternoon. It's like a holiday, isn't it? It's like a holiday to have an afternoon with people who love cricket, love the game, and it's November. It's not very promising, to be honest, although it's a lovely cold day, but it's a November and you're here, and we do thank you so much for that. Now, listen, I promise you, I'm not going to do all the talking, but I'm just going to say a word, and I promise, and thank God, otherwise you'll all go home early, but I promise I won't. But, you know, it's a real treat for you, and it's a treat for me to have Roger here, a great friend in cricket of mine and of many, many people all over the world. And I think I can honestly say, I'm just going to embarrass you slightly, but if you can bear it, but you will be able to, because I'm going to be nice. That Roger is, in my view, one of the rare, true all-rounders within our midst. And I don't just mean good at batting and good at bowling and catching well. That's handy, of course, if you're a cricketer. But I mean an all-rounder in as much that he has sport, cricket, he has education, headmaster and housemaster and teacher. Quite a thing that, going alongside the cricket, a little bit like football and cricket, except it's education and cricket. And then, of course, MCC, leadership of MCC, leadership within cricket and management, administration, and the huge amount that all involves, and so much more than I even realize. And within all that, there's what I call the leadership front. So leadership of Surrey County Cricket Club successfully. That's a big thing. Leadership within education, which is as tough as it gets, really. I mean, MCC, a piece of cake by comparison. God, no, it wasn't. I know it wasn't. But all those things. So what we've got is Roger here with his book, which I'll chat about a little bit later, with his book, with a very, very strong, powerful, all-round knowledge of life, people, and of course, cricket. Roger, thank you for being here. So that's a great introduction to all these things, all these facets, which you probably don't really realize. And it is encapsulated in this book, which is called Boundaries, lots of copies, but I'll refer to that later. Boundaries, a memoir, and it covers a lot of ground. And I know the one thing I always long to ask, and just to kick us off, is, Roger, what inspired you at this stage to write this wonderful book? Big question, isn't it? Well, is that an A-level or university question?
GCSE.
GCSE, it's a simple one.
Well, can I start by saying that it is such a pleasure to be back with John and chatting, as we did in the dressing room at Sussex. And I'd like him as my marketing manager, selling the book and so on. When he talked about me being an all-rounder, when I was in the classroom and in the common room, everyone saw me as a professional cricketer. When I was on the cricket field, they all accused me of being an academic. So I'm not quite sure, really, what I am.
We never accused you of that.
No, no.
Sorry about that.
I think Sussex saw through me rather more than the others did, probably. But we had a wonderful time together, and I've read Johnny's books, and I thought, well, if he's going to write books as captain of Sussex, as captain of Surrey, so am I going to give it a go. Actually, when I left Lords, I thought I wanted to say something about the inner workings of MCC. And Des Wilson, who is a New Zealander who founded Shelter and was my marketing and PR advisor, really, communications perhaps, advisor at Lord's said, well, of course you've got to write. You've got to dish the dirt. And I said, well, I don't think I'm going to do that because I've spent 12 and a half years being diplomatic and tactful and taking a lot of flack at AGMs and things like that. So I'm not going to do that. But it made me think. And so I've been thinking about it. My father wrote a book about his teaching. He taught for 39 years at Dulwich, and he wrote something called DVK, Dulwich Man. And of course, my initials are RDVK. So when I was president of the Old Boys, I used to go along and say, it's RDVK, but that's what people have always said. DVK, but I'm the other one. And so I thought, well, I'm going to write something about MCC. And then I thought, well, I actually want to write something for the family so that they know, how I came through, how I managed to combine cricket and teaching, and really where I started. And so I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And then finally, I spoke at Stephen Chalk's Bath, or I think it's the Bath Cricket Society, and he interviewed me. And he said, well, you have got to say, but people will be interested. Some people will be interested in the cricket you played. Some will be interested in the teaching that you should have done, but weren't there for the third term, for the summer. Some will be interested in MCC and what goes on there. And probably most will be wondering how on earth I got to where I got to. And so there will be an interest. And so I started to write it. And it was a thing that during lockdown was a real lifesaver, really. It gave me plenty to do, got me out of my wife's hair a bit. And I sat at my desk, firstly in New Zealand, where we have a holiday home for the summer, and then in Oxford, which is where we now live. And I really enjoyed doing it. And Stephen Chalk has been marvelous. He read the drafts, and actually, as did Des at one stage. Des very early on said, he can't write that, no one's interested in that. And he came back with more red lines than I used to write on people's essays. But then Stephen said, yes, I think we've got something here, and let me go through it. And he was absolutely meticulous, corrected me numerous times. And so we ended up with Boundaries, which is nothing to do with me batting. It's more to do with defending, making sure when I was bowling, there weren't too many, living within them as a schoolmaster's son and as a schoolmaster, and then MCC secretary, where I never went to pick the papers up at the Grace Gate without putting a tie on, because I thought it was the done thing. And so Boundaries have sort of been there all through my life.
Honestly, everyone here, county cricket, as you know, is really tough.
It is. It's a hard life, but someone has to do it.
It's really tough. And being captain of a county cricket team is really tough. And Roger's done that. Even I've done that, but we've both done that. Roger has also been the headmaster of a school, Worksop College, in northern Nottinghamshire, right in the north of bit of Nottinghamshire.
As near to Yorkshire as a Surrey man dare live. Yes.
Oh, that's very good. But so we've got captain of a county, and not just captain of a county, but captain of Surrey. How many Surrey people have we got here today? Oh, we got one actually. I thought there'd be more. but captain of Surrey, that's a tough one. Headmaster, and before that, housemaster, and then MCC, all having to deal with many lovely people, but just the occasional troublesome person. Roger, of those three, captain of Surrey, headmaster, education, obviously, and MCC, it's a very difficult question, but which of the three, or is it impossible, gave you the most fulfillment and joy? Both of those things.
Well, I don't think I can really say. I loved it all. I would have done it all for nothing. Most of the time I did. And I really enjoyed teaching. I was always going to be a schoolmaster. I wanted to teach. And I went up to university thinking I'm going to get a degree and I'm going to do a diploma of education and I'm going to teach, as my father had done, all the way through. And yet I wanted to just see whether I could play cricket. And originally I thought I'll play for 3 years. There was no place in the Surrey side at that time because the top 6 batsmen were Mike Edwards, John Edridge, Mickey Stewart, Eunice Ahmed, Graham Roop and Stuart Story. And they'd all made 1,000 runs in 1970. And although I'd played for 3 years in the university holidays, it was really only when John Edridge was in the test matches. So I actually started with Gloucestershire and I loved it. I really enjoyed playing down in Gloucestershire with quite a senior team. Tony Brown, the captain, Arthur Milton, who was one of the best coaches, actually, although he wasn't the coach. I mean, he was marvellous. I remember playing against Bob Willis quite early on, and Bob and I grew up together at the Oval. And I went down to Gloucestershire, played against him, played forward first ball and missed it, played back next ball and missed it. And from the other end, Arthur Milton said, "What are you going to do now? You've done both forward and back. There's not much left." But he was that sort of a person, really helpful as a batsman alongside you. Anyway, I relaxed and probably got out so that Mike Proctor could come in. But you ask about joy. It has been a wonderful time to have played cricket. County cricket, as John says, was tough. In the 70s and 80s, you had the best players in the world from all around the world. And I mean, it was a real test. The gap between county cricket and international cricket probably wasn't quite as large as it appears to be at the moment. And these overseas players came to, I mean, we played with Kepler Vessels and Javed Miandad, and then Imran joined in. And I mean, captaining people like Imran, it must have been quite difficult. I had Sylvester Clarke, which was an absolute joy, as I'm sure Johnny found.
Have you ever captained a Prime Minister?
No, probably not. I have had John Major to dinner.
Sorry, that's my only name drop I can think of. Sorry about that. Sorry, keep going.
So county cricket was great and I loved it. And 14 years as a professional was a real stint. And I would have given up actually earlier, I think, if I hadn't suddenly been given the chance of being a captain, because I think captain adds that extra dimension. In fact, after 5 years at Gloucestershire, where I was teaching at Eastbourne College, which is not ideal if you've got a family. So we spent 2 terms at Eastbourne, living in a school flat, and then we had our own little place down in Bristol, which we shared with Roy Sweatman, who was the wicketkeeper at the time. So we went backwards and forwards. Then it was time really to settle because we had a daughter and she needed school. And so I decided that either I had to find a school in Gloucestershire that would let me have the summer term off, which was highly unlikely probably, or I had to go and think about playing for Sussex. And so that's what happened. And I went to Sussex and loved those 2 years. And at that stage, I actually thought I was probably going to have to stop. Just before I left Gloucestershire, I was asked by somebody, was it true I was actually going to stop playing cricket? And I said, well, it's one of the options, but I'm not sure. I love the game, but I think I may have to give up. And this chap said, well, if you're asked to be captain of Gloucestershire after Tony Brown, would you consider it? And I said, well, obviously that would make a difference. And he said, if you're selected for England, which had been mentioned a couple of times, would that make a difference to you? So I said, well, yes, obviously, I wouldn't give up then. So the following day in the paper, the headline was, Roger Knight will only play for Gloucestershire next year if he's captain or if he's selected for England. So Tony Brown, when I got there, sort of, could I have a word, please? So I had to explain. And actually, the article was fine. It was just the headline writer who had upset it. Anyway, then we got to Sussex. So after 2 years there, we had the Packer affair. Tony Gregg was giving up. The headmaster at Eastbourne said that he was quite keen that I should become a housemaster, which is what I wanted to do in a year's time, but he thought I ought to be there full time for a year beforehand. And then suddenly, out of the blue, Alf Gover rang and said, well, old boy, would you like to come back to the Oval and be captain? And I said, well, I don't know. And Surrey were a difficult side at the time, as Johnny will remember. They were not happy under John Edridge in the last couple of years. They were bickering, they were moaning, which was rather typical of the Surrey side at some stages in life. And so suddenly I had the option of perhaps carrying on at Sussex, perhaps being captain of Surrey, perhaps being a housemaster. And so I had to make a decision then, and the decision was, well, Surrey is my county, that's where I started, so I want to go back there, I want to captain them. And we had Fred Titmus, that well-known Surrey man, who had played for 27 years for Middlesex as the manager, and I got on really well with him. But a lot of the senior players didn't think that he was the appropriate person to be there. John Edridge decided he would carry on for a year, which didn't help the atmosphere because some people didn't get on awfully well with John. And each evening after a day's play, he would say, come and have a meal with me. We oldies must stick together. And at that stage, I think I was only about 34, but I was obviously an oldie. And so it was difficult to start with, but I loved it. And then Mickey came the next year. And I mean, there were two major things. One was Mickey coming back in as manager, which was great. And we worked extremely well. And the second thing was getting this chap, Sylvester Clarke, who helped enormously. And Robin Jackman had a new lease of life and took 120 wickets. And so having steered them to 16th out of 17 in 1978, we suddenly came third in the championship. And so it was a different ball game altogether. And I love that. So in answer to your question, did I enjoy playing? I loved it. You know, I would have done it, whatever, really. And then headmastering, housemastering, teaching French and a bit of German, running rugby teams, actually producing a play, or at least allowing a boy to direct the play so that I could sort of take all the kudos as the producer, and playing table tennis with the youngsters, sort of 9 o'clock at night in the boarding house. I loved all of that. And I was really a schoolmaster who'd enjoyed playing cricket. And then I'd never really thought of being a headmaster, but I was really put off, I think, by the headmaster of Cranley at the time, who had come from the Treasury and didn't really understand education. And I thought, well, if he can do it, I'm sure I can. And so I applied to a couple of schools and got into the last 4, but didn't get the job. And suddenly, a chap that I played rugby with at Cambridge, Hugh Munro, not that I sort of had much to do with him, as a forward who kept sort of rolling around and falling on the floor. I was a back, and I used to pass the ball and keep out of the way of trouble. But he rang me and said, I'm giving up. I've been headhunted, and I'm going from Worksop College to be headmaster of Clifton College. Would you be interested? And I said, well, I would. So I went up for an interview with a mentor who was a wonderful chap, who was my head of languages at Dulwich. He said, look, if you're going up there, play down the cricket, talk about education and business and so on. So I thought, absolutely, that's what I intended to do. So I went up for the interview, the whole of the governing body, about 20 of them, and me. And the first question was asked by somebody called Joy Powlett-Smith, Joy Powlett-Smith. And I thought, well, here we go, first question. And she said, Mr. Knight, my hero is Derek Randall. Do you know him? So education and business went out of the window very early on.
Did you own up that you did know him?
I did, yes. I said he's balmy, isn't he? But he's good fun.
So Derek got you the job.
I think he probably did, yes. Well, actually, no. My wife probably got me the job, because she came in for 15 minutes at the end of the interview to be interviewed by everybody. And the first question was, how do you think you're going to support your husband in the role? Which, of course, you can't really do nowadays. And she said, well, I don't know, I'm probably going to get a bit of a job somewhere part-time, but I'll be here to entertain. And, I've been a housemaster's wife, and it was great. And then,
And then MCC, the big one. You might say the big one, you might not. I would say the big one. But,
yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, after 3 years, which was indecently short, actually, at Worksop, somebody, an MCC member actually rang me up and said, "Are you going to apply?" And I said, "For what?" I had no idea that John Stevenson was giving up. And he said, "Well, John's going, he's retiring, and MCC will be looking for a secretary. You should apply." And I said, "I can't. I've only been here at that stage 2.5 years." And of course, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, cool, well, if I have a chance, that would be an opportunity. So I went to see the chairman of governors and I said, "I'm in a slightly awkward position because I don't really want to apply for the job, because what will the parents think? What will the common room think? But on the other hand, if there were a chance of getting it, I would obviously quite like it." And he said, "Well, you need to tell MCC you can't apply, but here's my CV." And so that's what happened, really.
That's interesting.
And he was brilliant, the chairman of governors. And so, I mean, the rest became history, really. That was the end of my teaching. And so I arrived at Lord's, and my very last lesson was with a third form, 13-year-olds, boys and girls. It was the headmaster's hour. It actually only lasted 45 minutes, but they thought it was an hour. And one of the girls said, "Sir, can I ask you a question? When you've been a county captain and a headmaster, why do you want to be a secretary?"
That's very good.
So, I mean, she wasn't the only one who was mistaken, because somebody who applied for the job said that they did 80 words a minute for shorthand. So they obviously thought that I couldn't compete with that. But I ended up at Lord's, which was, I mean, a boy's own job, really. You were dealing, John, you were probably chairman of something. You were certainly on the committee, certainly on the cricket committee.
Yeah, it's a bad luck.
And so we joined up again, really. And I shall never forget Colin Cowdrey saying, "I think as secretary of MCC, you should get together the good guys in cricket." He said, "Johnny Barclay's a good start." And I thought, yes. I thought, yes, but there must be some good guys as well.
But I think that it's wonderful to hear that. But one thing at MC, when Roger began as secretary, and then the word chief executive was added a few years later. I can't remember how much later.
Yeah, about 6 years.
Say about 6 years later, because I remember that. I was around, remember, which of course gave it more substance in a funny sort of way. Did you feel that?
No.
No.
It made no difference whatsoever.
But it made me feel that you were even more heroic. And I'm sure it made others feel the same. But the great thing about Roger being at MCC with a background that wasn't entirely cricket, but with a very strong cricketing background, is that this hadn't happened for a bit, if ever, to have that. That's why I started with the all-rounder, because there aren't enough, in my humble view, all-rounders. And what I'd just like to ask, and I think, again, it might need a moment's thought, is within this all-rounder, education, sport, leadership, admin, all the rest. Admin sounds so dull, sorry about that. Management, that's quite dull. But
I couldn't manage
with all these things, who were the, right, say from the beginning and then through, if you can think, who were perhaps the major influences on your life, the sort of heroes, unsung heroes, who you looked up to and who made a difference to your world, like we will all have?
I was lucky to go to Dulwich College. We had some marvelous members of staff there, and they were pushing you forward, but at the same time saying, don't get ahead of yourself. And I think that made a difference. And I knew a lot of them personally because my father was there as a member of staff. I think there was a chap called Terry Walsh who became the deputy head. And he had the most amazing bowling action. He played a little bit for Hampshire second team. And when he bowled, it was like a corkscrew, and he used to sort of go around like this and bowl it there. And I mean, when you were sort of batting against him, you didn't know when the ball was coming out or where it was coming out from. And he took a lot of wickets in the nets. And he was very good. He coached me some rugby early on and told me I had to play at fly half. And he told me how to control a game at fly half, which was quite important, I think. And then he coached me again on and off at cricket, and he taught me some history. And so he was my father's housemaster. So he was always on site, always there. And I found him really helpful. And then when I think when I went to Eastbourne College, the headmaster, Simon Langdale, was an excellent man. He was a real diplomat. He'd been a housemaster at Radley under Dennis Silk. And Dennis was a fantastic warden, as they called him at Radley. And I think in his time, he managed to persuade other schools that 15 of his staff should go on and be heads. And they did. And it was sort of conveyor belt, really. So Simon Langdale was a very good example. He never put a foot wrong somehow. And in fact, I remember we did something, I can't remember quite what it was, but he arrived on our front doorstep with a bottle of wine saying, "Very well done." And he said it in very much the same tone that Dennis Silk would have said it. And Chris, my wife, who got on really well with Simon, said, "Do you know, he must even crease his pajamas. He's always so immaculately dressed and everything else." So that was him. And then Mickey Stewart in cricket as the manager was a great influence. He was my captain when I started playing. And I very much enjoyed him as the manager at Surrey, because he and I had a balance. We both had a reasonable sense of humour. And we used to have a go at each other, but in a friendly way. And I always accused him of being, actually, he would have been a better captain and I'd have been a better manager, because I thought he couldn't stand away. When things went wrong, he wanted to wade in. Whereas I sometimes said, I think we should just leave it until tomorrow. We had one particular situation, which I shall never forget, was where we were batting up at Edgbaston and we lost the game that we really should have won. And afterwards, as we were coming off, I think actually they needed 10 to win, so we fielded for the last 5 minutes or something. And anyway, as we came off, he said, "Captain," with his hands in his trouser belt, as he always did, "Captain, I want to work with the team." I said, "Mickey, now isn't the time. You know, I don't think anyone needs to. No, I want to do it now." So he sat us all down in the dressing room at Edgbaston. And then he called us all cowards. He said, "Nobody took responsibility. None of you batsmen went out there and batted properly." And David Smith, who had actually got 50 and was a big 6'5", irascible man, took exception to this. So he leapt to his feet. "Here, who are you calling a coward?" And Mickey said, "You, if it fits." And of course, I was there sort of holding them apart. Well, it was more like that, really. And David Smith was getting very irate, and Mickey wasn't going to take a backward step. And I said, "Mickey, leave it, leave it." Anyway, David then decided that he wasn't going to hit him after all. And as he went out, left all his kit, there was a whack as he smashed the wall with his hand. And for those of you who have ever been to Edgbaston in the 70s, you will, or it probably might have been 80s by then, but there was that awful sort of ripple type wall outside, and he completely ruined his hand. He cut it and so on. Anyway, he then got in his car and drove home, leaving all his kit. So Mickey said, "I think I better go and see him, hadn't I, on the way back?" So Mickey then drove, and when he got there, David had calmed down completely, was sitting with his daughter along his arm, his great big hand and a tiny little daughter, as calm as anything. And he said, "Sorry, manager." And that was all. And that was David. And of course, you had him, didn't you, at Sussex for a bit. A terrific cricketer, but a very short fuse. And a guy you perhaps didn't want to annoy. I mean, we did have one or two little issues at Surrey with him. when somebody picked up his bat and he told him to put it down, and he said, "Oh, it's all right." So he got a whack for it. So when you talk about all this verbal abuse that seems to have been going on in Yorkshire, we had a bit more physical abuse at the Open.
Roger, what was the absolute, perhaps there wasn't one, but what was the absolute worst occasion or worst thing within a cricket match you can remember at Surrey, or anywhere actually? Was there any ghastly event that comes to mind?
Well, I suppose the biggest regret was we were playing a game down at Portsmouth. I was captain of Surrey. We had Sylvester, we had Inticarb, and we had Jeff Howarth, and we could only play 2 of them. Well, Sylvester was always going to play if fit. So it was a question then, did we play Inti or did we play Jeff Howarth? And we were playing on a green top at Portsmouth. It was quite bouncy at Portsmouth, but they left some grass on. I think maybe they had Malcolm Marshall, but they hadn't quite counted for that. We got Sylvester Clark. Anyway, I thought, right, I think I want Inti because it gives me variety. If it's going to bounce, he might take wickets and he might smash a few runs. And also, David Smith had just made a 50 in the game before, and I wanted him to have another chance. So I made the decision without really talking to many people, and thought that Inti should play and Jeff Howarth shouldn't. So having done that, Mickey then said, "I think you're wrong. But I think you've got to play Jeff. He's your best batsman." Robin Jackman came rushing up and said, "Captain, you've got it all wrong. You've got to play Jeff. We haven't tossed up yet." So there was still a chance. And so I thought, I think I'm on my own here. I think I've got this wrong. So having told Jeff that he wasn't playing, and Inti that he was, I was then faced with a situation. What did I do? And so I went to Jeff Howarth and I said, "Jeff, I think I've got this wrong. I think from what everybody is saying, you should be the one playing and not Inti." He told me to get stuffed. He'd rather play in the second team than play under me. So we actually played with Inti, and we won the game. Now, we probably could have won the game with Jeff as well, but it just made me realize that if you make a decision, you really have got to consult properly first. And having made the decision, going back is not necessarily always a sign of strength. I was wrong, probably. But we had another situation where Mickey said this should happen, and I gave way to him, and we won that game too. So perhaps he was right occasionally.
So it's not easy, is it? It's tough. You've got David Smith on the one hand. It's not easy. And that's just cricket. That's not even being a headmaster or Lord. Do you know, I'm not going to tell you, changing the subject very slightly, but in a lovely way. Rod, just before the first lockdown, 2019, you will all remember, all of you will remember that dramatic World Cup final match at Lord's, arguably the best one-day game anybody could, and the most exciting and thrilling anyone could possibly want to see. Now, would you believe it? Would you believe it? I sat in the final, 20 overs roughly?
Yep.
By chance, we were sitting just like this, watching this game unfold and going through the possible permutations, never conceivably getting it right. I was just going to say, Roger, obviously the answer is yes, really, but was that one of the great games? You've seen so many games of cricket and played in so many. Would that rate pretty highly on the Richter scale?
Yeah, I mean, it was, as John says, it was the best game of cricket you could possibly have. On the other hand, how on earth did New Zealand lose when they got as many runs twice and took more wickets? I mean, only ICC could manufacture that.
I didn't realise that. You're a great statistician. And it was extraordinary. But it begs the question also, although that was, as it were, the longer form of short form cricket, in other words, a 50-over game, albeit with extra bits added on because it was so thrilling. But how do you feel about the contrast and the variety of the longer form game, the test match game, the 5-day game or the 4-day county game, compared with the short form game, T20, and now the 100, which came into operation, or at least we had a look at last year. How do you feel the balance? What would you feel over the balance of the world game in terms of short and long form cricket? Because I think it'll interest everybody, isn't it?
I think the issue really is, are you a player or are you a spectator? If you're a player, I think you want to play as long as you can. And the 5-day game, the 4-day game, the 3-day game that we played, you had opportunities as a batsman to defend and to attack, to choose your moment. As a bowler, you had to think about, do you buy your wickets? Do you keep it tight? And the captain has to keep on doing that all the time. And as a player, I really liked the 3-day game. Having said that, I loved the 1-day game, the 60 overs as we played, the Gillette and the NatWest, or the 55, the Benson and Hedges. I didn't find the 40 overs quite so satisfactory, but having said that, I had a very good year at Sussex.
You were very good at it.
When I slogged it. I mean, everyone thought I played on the offside, which I did. But I kind of kept hitting offside sixes. I must have hit a few over that side. But the 40 over, I came to like more, but I didn't ever feel as satisfied having won that game as I did with the longer games. As a spectator, I think you come from the other end and think, well, I haven't got that much time. So probably the shorter game, the 2020, which of course, I did play 20 overs. We used to play 15 overs as old boys at Dulwich in the evenings. We used to play 20 overs occasionally. I even played in a 10-over game, believe it or not, at Crystal Palace and at Chelsea Football Club on a strip in the middle where there was absolutely no point in driving it rather elegantly along the ground towards the goal because it stopped about halfway in the long grass. So you tried to slog it over mid-wicket or over cover, which wasn't really part of my game. So I think as a spectator, you probably want it to be exciting. Personally, as a spectator, I don't find the 2020 as exciting as a real test match. You don't watch every ball in a test match. You haven't got time because you're talking to John, who
Sorry about that. Sorry.
or somebody else in the box, which is great. In a 1-day game, you do need to see everything. And of course, batsmen or batters have to, and actually, I think we always used to call them batters. So I don't think there's any big deal about it. But anyway, batters have to get the bat on every ball in a 2020. You can't afford to let a ball go past. Well, if you can picture it, me with no helmet trying to hook against somebody playing a shot I couldn't play because I've got to, I'd have been killed probably. And so I mean, I suppose I'd have worn a helmet if we played 2020 then. And I said to the taxi driver coming down here, if I tried to play the scoop without a helmet on, I don't think I'd have been sitting there in the back of his taxi. So I do think we need to value the top game, which has to be the longer game. And I hope that people will market it better. I mean, it's terribly easy to market a short game. It's all razzmatazz, it's music, it's, I mean, I went to a couple of hundreds because I thought I'd take the grandchildren. I've got a daughter, a 15-year-old daughter, who is a mad keen sportswoman, very good. And she plays cricket with a girl who plays for under 15s at Hampshire. And I said I'd take them along. And I was delighted when the girl from Hampshire said, why do they keep showing that dancer on the screen? Why don't they show the cricket? And I thought, that's my girl. And then when you got the interviewer going round and talking to these 3 little chaps who were watching the cricket and saying, well, is it very exciting? Yeah. And what do you think is going to happen next? I don't know. And they went on, and then he said, well, shall we start a Mexican wave? And I thought, well, what's that got to do with cricket? And that's my concern about the way it's all being marketed and pushed. And I mean, money plays a big part, of course. On the other hand, in England, test matches raise a lot of money. MCC at Lord's and Surrey at the Oval make a lot of money for the game, playing their test matches. It's not the case elsewhere around the world, or not as much. if England are playing, you've got the Barmy Army there, so they sort of swell the numbers. England, Australia is always good. India is always good value. People want to watch them, but a lot of the others aren't really all that bothered about Test cricket, and that's sad to me. And I hope we don't just become a glorified, better game of baseball, which is what we could become, I think.
It's interesting. I mean, there's no doubt, Roger, I think, that an awful lot is now expected. This is at the top end of our professional cricketers, the long game, the short game, the money involved, the travel, the whole thing is very different. Do you think, Roger, that in some ways cricket, we expect a lot, and we've seen this in the last fortnight come to a rather painful head, and it hasn't finished yet, but we expect an awful lot of just cricketers and their behavior and their reaction to social changes and the way people behave and the way people address each other and speak, all the way, not just in Yorkshire, but everywhere. Do you think an awful lot is expected, or do you think I'm a bit soft there?
No, you're right. I mean, it's an appalling situation that has developed up at Yorkshire. And I think, in a way, the worst part of it is the way it's perhaps not been handled properly, rather than the original thing. I was saying to someone the other day, in a dressing room, it's a pressurized area. People say things that are sometimes unkind. They say things that are unpleasant. They have a go at somebody because they don't like them. It doesn't have to be a racist comment or a homophobic comment or a sexist comment or any kind of, it's just said on the heat of the moment. And of course we shouldn't say it, but it's not banter. And banter is fun between people. I mean, for example, Intikhab, everybody called him Boona, because whenever we went out for a meal, we always had a boona, an Indian curry. And nobody objected to that at all. He didn't mind. So, somebody said, had I experienced racism? And I can honestly say, I don't think I did. We made comments, but they weren't unpleasant comments. They weren't derogatory comments. And they weren't even unintentionally unkind, I don't think. But, I mean, clearly, people do say some unpleasant things, whether it's on the field. It's when a stray comment becomes sledging and it's become much more personal. I do object to a lot of the comments that are now made, apparently, on the field of play. I mean, to me, that's got nothing to do with it. But then that's society, isn't it? People in all walks of life say unpleasant things about other people. I think what we must be careful about is assuming that because one person said something to one other person, everybody else will do the same. Maybe two people, three people, maybe a lot. Sometimes, and I have no idea, I don't know the personalities at all in the Yorkshire scene, but sometimes there are people in a dressing room who don't get on for whatever reason. We had a chap at the Oval. I liked him, but he spent a lot of time admiring his body in front of the mirror in the gym. And people had a bit of a go at him, the body beautiful and so on. I mean, he was quite well built, I must say. And I did feel rather inferior when I was in the gym next to him. But it was a comment because people found him a bit annoying. Yunus was not the same as Intikhab. Two Pakistanis in the same side. Inti was liked by everybody. Yunus was liked by some, but not others. And now, I don't think he got racist abuse. He got abuse probably, but I think it was because people didn't like the personality. And that's part of the issue, I think. Just coming back to Yorkshire for a minute, going on a little bit. I played with Mike Proctor, a South African in the time of apartheid, playing in the same side as Zahir Abbas and Sadiq Mohammed. There wasn't a problem anywhere. I played with Kepler Wessels, who was an Afrikaner, with Javid Miandad at Sussex. There wasn't a problem there at all. And I played at the Oval with Sylvester Clarke, West Indian, and Monty Lynch. And Sylvester used to, Monty Lynch, who grew up in Walton-on-Thames, but with a West Indian heritage. And Sylvester used to say, "Here, Monty, here, black man, get my boots." Now, if a white man had said that, we'd have thought, well, we can't have that.
It's interesting.
But it didn't, it wasn't unpleasant. And it was just the way we were, I think. And I think sometimes you're part of the group because people can make fun of you. And sometimes if you don't take it, it's difficult. And schools, it's the same. Is it bullying, or is it just something that, happens? And it's terribly difficult, I think. We had instances of bullying in the school in the schools really where I was. But a lot of it was just, I think it should have been acceptable, but it then spilled over because somebody took offense. And that's the issue. You can't not speak because you're afraid of saying something, because sometimes you just don't know. But if you do say unkind things, then in a way you deserve all you get. So it's a difficult balance, isn't it?
It's very hard. All I can say is that at Sussex, we never had a problem with the Prime Minister of Pakistan. We took the mickey out of him mercilessly.
Yeah.
And of course he grinned. He had a big grin. And he grinned. That's not to say there's not a problem. I'm not brushing the thing aside. This is clearly something that needs to be brought to a head. But the perspective, in my humble view, needs to be very clear as well. But listen, enough of that for a moment. We're going to have a break in a second because we've gone on long enough. And are we ready for our break in a minute? I'm getting a thumbs up. But what I want to, during the break, I just want to remind you all that there are books. This great book, Boundaries, a Memoir, Roger's book, is on sale. How much is it?
£20.
£20. £20, do you know, makes the perfect Christmas present when you're desperate. When you're desperate and you can't think of anything to give anyone, here we are, 20 quid. For a Christmas present these days, 20 quid is not so bad, actually.
No, if you're desperate, John, thank you very much.
And it's really, I have read it. I really have read this book. It's beautifully written. It is beautifully written. And it's a history. It takes you through all sorts of areas of education, cricket, MCC, people. And I think you will, if you haven't read it already, which you may have done, I think you will absolutely love it. So without more ado, Nick is standing there longing to...
I should have said it earlier, but there is a special edition of the book as well, which, if you're interested in the special edition, talk to John Mackenzie, who's sitting over there.
Can I, can I just say, yes, it is a limited edition that John has produced. 75 of them. They are all signed personally by the two people that wrote forwards, Mike Brearley and Tim Rice. Also by Kumar Sangakkara, who at the time that we finished it was the president of MCC, and by some chap who was the author, and I can't remember what his name was. But so it's there as a limited edition. And I have to say, I was delighted to see it when John sent me #1 copy, which was really fantastic. And it looks a marvelous thing on the bookcase. I'm going to start reading it soon.
Great. So we'll set up over there. We'll do the raffle and we'll reconvene in 20 minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
You are brilliant. Can you just scribble on that? Oh, you might have done. Yeah, that would be so